The first thing Sheriff Kane knew was the taste of smoke in his mouth. Bitter, oily, wrong. Then came the heat, a hard shove against his skin, as if the devil himself had placed a hand on his chest and pushed. He rolled from the cot onto a floor already turning to ember, boots scuffing across boards that hissed like snakes. Window glass cracked and sang, rafters popped like rifle shots. His black hat hung on the bedpost, a dark shape in a red world. He snatched it and jammed it down, collar up, eyes narrowed to slits against the glare. The flames spoke in tongues. Pine pitch boomed in the walls. A curtain went from blue shadow to white fire in a breath. Kane staggered toward the trunk by the door, kicked it open, reached in, blind. Fingers found hard leather, the pearl-butt weight of his Colt, .45. The familiar heft steadied his mind, the way an old hymn settles a church. He looped the holster across his hips as the ceiling buckled. The heat chased him like a thing alive. Move, he told himself, voice a dry rasp. He dove through the kitchen as plaster fell in sheets, grabbed the iron latch, and shouldered the back door. It stuck. He hit it again, teeth bared. Hinges screamed. The door gave, and the night took him. Cold rain spitting, wind carrying sparks like angry bees. He stumbled off the stoop and dropped into the water trough, hissing as steam rose around him. His duster smoked. He rolled, came up dripping, hat askew, scar on his jaw, white as a knife mark in the flicker. Neighbors were running now, boots slapping mud, lanterns swinging. "Sweet Lord, Sheriff," someone cried. Another voice, meaner, "God's justice, if you ask me." The house roared higher, a furnace lit against a coal-black sky. Shingles lifted like blackened leaves, and the air smelled of lamp oil and pitch. Not lightning, not accident. Kane stood with the wind in his coat and the fire glazing his steel-gray eyes. He watched the home he had built and rebuilt die quick and bright. He did not scream. He did not pray. He set 2 fingers on the silver badge pinned to his chest, felt it hot beneath the wet cloth, and for a breath saw the night before, as if the flame itself had opened it like a book. The town had been a single hard voice at dusk. Men pressed to the jailhouse porch, wet hats dripping, railings lined with knuckles. Someone had hauled the gallows rope into the lamplight as a reminder, as if justice lived in hemp. The captured outlaw, Ephraim Vale, gaunt as a winter wolf, knelt on the plank floor with his wrists bound. Blood on his shirt had turned black. His eyes were quick and mocking, even with a split lip. "Hang him, Kane!" A rancher bellowed, spit cutting a trail in the dust. "You seen what he done to the Denver coach." "Hang him high," another added, a woman's voice, flat with loss. Deputy Collar, square-shouldered, mustache thin as a scar, stood with the cell keys in his palm and his other hand on the butt of his gun. "The town's right," he said. "No sense feeding a wolf. Rope's cheaper than law, Sheriff." Kane's badge spun slow between his thumb and forefinger. He wasn't a man for speeches. He let his eyes read the crowd, every face weathered by sun and grief. The wind pushed grit along the boardwalk. The lantern chimed gently against its hook. Across the street, the gallows threw a long black cross over the road, like a preacher's shadow. He looked down at Vale. "You robbed a coach. You left a driver with his eyes open to the rain. You don't get mercy from me," Kane said, voice steady. "You get law." Murmurs rose, harsh and disappointed. The rope twitched like it wanted work. "Law says trial," Kane added. "Sun up." Collar's jaw worked. "You go soft on him, you'll answer to this town." Kane turned his head a fraction. "You answer to me while you wear that tin," he said. The words weren't loud, but they landed like a hammer. He took the keys, and the weight of the jailhouse felt right in his hand. "Put him inside." They shoved Ephraim Vale into the cell. The iron shut with a church bell ring. The outlaw slid to the cot and smiled through the blood. "Your mercy's gonna cost you, Sheriff," he said softly, almost kindly. "Men like me burn down the things men like you love." His eyes flicked toward Kane's hat, toward the cut on his jaw, toward something he could not know but somehow did. "You'll see." Kane held the stare, and the memory of 2 graves in raw earth moved like a knife in his chest. He took the canteen from a hook, passed it through the bars. Vale drank without looking away. "Law ain't always justice," Kane said, voice lowering to the iron, "but justice rides with me." He set his Colt on the desk as he wrote the charge. The pen scratched like a mouse in a wall. The town began to thin, disappointment clinging like smoke. Rain hissed on the street. Deputy Collar left with a cold glance at the cell, and a nod that felt like a threat. Kane sat with the jailhouse quiet around him, thumbs against his badge, eyes on the man whose survival he had bought with a sunrise. He did not sleep long. The fire had been set from 2 sides. Kane could read that in the way the porch had caught low and the rafters had caught high. He moved around the wreck with the slow carefulness of a man tracking a rattler in tall grass. A charred bottle lay under the ash of the kitchen window. Black ribbon of its neck curled like a burned tongue. The rain tried to wipe the smell away. It failed. This was a hand's work. "You spared a devil, Sheriff," a woman said behind him. He didn't turn. He knew the voice. Mrs. DeWitt, whose boy had bled out on the freight road. "God spared you tonight to think on it." "Fetch water," Kane said, and it came out polite enough that it didn't sound like a command until she moved to do it. He crouched at the sill. A boot print had taken a neat half-moon out of the wet ash. Spur rowel mark, 7-point. Men who wore 7-point spurs liked you to hear them coming. He touched the print with 2 knuckles and felt the steam rise. The roof groaned and went in on itself, a tired animal lowering its head. Sparks jumped and vanished in the rain. Smoke crawled across the yard and into the cottonwoods, made a gray ribbon of the creek. Kane straightened and fixed his hat. The badge on his chest had gone dull with soot. He thumbed it clean and left a black smear across the star. He whistled for his horse. The paint came from the dark, ears pitched forward, sides flecked with ash. Kane swung up, and the saddle leather creaked against his wet coat. He turned toward town without looking back. A house is boards and nails. What it holds is what kills a man when it burns. Cedar Falls woke to him riding through rain, a burned man passing lamplit windows. Heads turned, words followed him like burrs. "Should have hung the bastard. Sheriff sold the law to pity. He'll bring fire to our doors." The gallows stood in the square like a gallant skeleton. Slick rope, dark with rain. Kane's eyes cut over it and passed, to the jailhouse lamp glowing steady, to the iron shadow on the door. He dismounted in one motion and tied off. The porch boards remembered his step. Inside, cold, the smell of coffee old enough to have a story. The desk sat where he had left it, pen laid across the charge sheet like a blessing. A chair scraped somewhere, and Kane's hand found the Colt without looking. The cylinder felt warm where his body heat had touched it. "Collar?" he called, voice level. No answer. He moved past the desk. The cell block gave a draft like a cave. Lantern light made bars into black teeth. Water ticked in the eaves. He reached the first cell and stopped. The lock hung open, tongue out like a fool's. The cot inside was rumpled, rope cut, a thread of it lying on the floor like a dead worm. On the wall, where damp soot took a mark easy as skin, someone had dragged a finger through char. Mercy Burns. The letters ran black on gray. A match head lay under the words, struck to leave its sulphur kiss. Kane watched a bead of rain work its way along the message, fatten and fall. He felt the town behind him like a crowd at a hanging, ready to cheer or scatter. He felt his badge against his breastbone, heavy as a stone. He listened because listening had kept him alive where bullets hadn't. Somewhere beyond the cells, a board clicked. A wet boot scuffed. A breath caught as if a man had remembered his lungs too late. A voice came from the dark, drawn thin, a whisper wrapped in a smile. Sheriff. Something cold, metal, oiled and patient, settled against the nape of his neck. The Colt in his hand felt like a saint's relic, powerful and far away. The lantern guttered and went out. The night before the fire, Cedar Falls carried a nervous hush, the kind of silence a town holds when it believes violence is coming, but doesn't know from where. Storm clouds hung low over the rooftops, muting the sunset into a blood-colored smear. Sheriff Kane walked the boardwalk slow, boots heavy, silver badge turning between his fingers like a coin of fate. He had just shackled a wolf, and the whole town wanted to see him bleed it. The outlaw Ephraim Vale sat in the cell like a man who'd chosen it himself. His wrists were raw from the rope, his smile thin, mocking. Lantern light cut his face in half. One side saint, one side devil. The townsfolk had gathered outside the jailhouse, their voices a rising tide. A rope dangled from the gallows across the street, swinging gently in the wind like it knew its work was near. "Sheriff," called Amos Dillard, a rancher whose brother had been cut down on the coach road. "We don't need no trial. Hang him and be done. Ain't law if killers live another sunrise." Others shouted the same, the chant building. Kane stood in the doorway, the lamplight throwing long shadows on the mud. His eyes, steel gray, scanned the crowd. These were people broken by loss, desperate for blood to heal wounds that never would. He understood them. He was them once. But the badge pressed cold against his chest, heavier than iron. He raised a hand, and the noise thinned. "Law says trial at sunup," he said, voice even, not before. A murmur of anger rippled. A woman spat in the dust. The silver badge glimmered in his palm. Some eyes followed it with hate, as if it were the true villain. Deputy Collar shifted at Kane's side, jaw set. "You're making a mistake, Sheriff," he muttered low. "Town wants blood. You stand in their way, they'll turn that rope on you." Kane's scar tightened as his teeth clenched. Then they'll learn law ain't a rope for their hands. He pocketed the key, feeling the weight of choice burn hotter than any fire. Inside, Vale laughed, soft and poisonous. "You saved me, Sheriff. But what you really did—" He leaned against the bars, voice a whisper meant to cut. "Is buy yourself a grave." Kane stepped close enough that the iron chilled his skin. His Colt sat heavy at his hip, pearl grip glinting. "Keep talking, outlaw, and you'll find mercy's got a limit." But Vale only smiled, slow and sure. "Mercy burns, Sheriff. You'll see." Later, after the crowd thinned, Kane sat in his office with a single lantern burning. Outside, rain began to fall, a soft hiss on the roof. He poured a measure of whiskey, the smell sharp as pine sap, and set it untouched on the desk. The outlaw's words rattled like loose bullets in a tin can. Mercy burns. He thought of 2 graves on the hill, the ones that held his wife and boy. He had shown mercy once years ago, and the cost had been their lives. He could still hear the gunshots, still see the way the horizon burned red that night. The jailhouse felt too small for the ghosts that lived inside him. He rose, paced, then stopped by the barred window. Across the street, the gallows stood slick with rain, its rope twitching like a snake waiting to strike. The town had built it quick, eager, hungry. He knew if he ordered the outlaw taken out now, no man or woman would stand in his way. They would cheer as the body swung. They would call it justice, and maybe for a time, the fire in their hearts would cool. His hand hovered near the key in his pocket. He felt its teeth bite into his palm, but then he thought of the badge, that star he had sworn to carry different than the men before him. Law was a road too narrow for mercy, too narrow for rage, but it was the only road he had left. He set the key back on the desk and whispered to the quiet, "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." The lantern flickered, shadows clawing the walls. Not long after midnight, a sound broke the stillness. Boots in mud, a hinge creaking. Kane's Colt was in his hand before thought caught up. He moved to the door, slow, silent, breath shallow. Through the slit of the shutters he saw a figure slip through the rain toward the jailhouse door. Thin frame, nervous steps. His deputy, Collar. Kane froze. Collar carried the look of a man sneaking to confession. He glanced over his shoulder, then touched the lock with too much familiarity. Kane's gut twisted cold. The door opened a fraction, then stilled. Kane stepped out of the dark with the Colt raised. "Deputy," he said, voice low but iron. Collar jumped like a snake bit him. "Sheriff, I was checking the hinges. Looked loose earlier. In the rain, past midnight." Kane's eyes cut deep, silver sharp. Collar faltered, sweat already beading under his hat. Before Kane could press, a laugh slithered from the cell. Vale, awake, watching. "See how quick they turn on you, Sheriff? Even your own man itching to cut me loose." Kane kept his gun steady, his mind burning with suspicion. Collar muttered excuses and backed away, face pale. The outlaw's words stayed. The jail felt poisoned. The storm thickened, and by dawn the streets ran with mud. Kane hadn't slept. He sat behind the desk, Colt laid out, badge spinning slow between his fingers. He stared at the outlaw's cell, where Vale sat calm, eyes closed as if waiting for something inevitable. The sky was bleeding pale light when a sound rose outside, the crowd returning, voices rising like thunder. The rope on the gallows swung in the wind. The town would demand again, louder, harsher. And Kane knew his house was only wood and nails. Fire eats both without hesitation. His choice the night before, mercy over rope, sat heavy as iron chains. He had spared his enemy, but the whisper in his gut told him he had spared more than a man. He had spared the spark that would burn his world. He touched the badge one last time, let it spin to a stop. Morning came gray and hollow, the kind of dawn that weighed heavy on men's hearts before they'd even broken bread. The air smelled of ash and damp earth. Cedar Falls gathered like a hive disturbed, voices buzzing, fists clenched, eyes sharp. Word of the fire had spread faster than smoke itself. Sheriff Kane rode into town, coat scorched at the hem, eyes like cut steel. His badge was dulled with soot, a star blackened but not broken. The people saw him coming. Whispers sharpened into words. There's the man who spared a devil. Law failed us. Sheriff's house burns. Tomorrow it'll be ours. Kane dismounted, boots hitting mud with the weight of iron. He tied his paint horse at the hitch outside the saloon, ignoring the spit that landed near his feet. The gallows loomed nearby, rope swaying like a finger pointing at him alone. The town square had turned into a court without walls, and he stood trial in it, whether he wished or not. At the general store porch, Amos Dillard stepped forward, eyes red, jaw tight. My brother bled on that coach road. We begged you for justice, Kane, and you locked it behind bars. Now look, your mercy lit a fire. Who answers when my house burns next? His hand shook as it gestured to the outlaw's cell across the way. Kane's gaze was steady, voice flat. Outlaws still in irons. The fire was set, but not by him. He was behind bars while my walls came down. Then who, Sheriff? Another voice cut in, a woman's, high with grief. You tell us who struck the match, or admit you're blind to it. The murmurs thickened, a tide of accusation. Deputy Collar stood near the jail, arms folded, eyes unreadable, though Kane caught the flicker of something, fear or guilt, behind them. The church bell tolled once, a hollow sound that made children clutch their mothers. Judge Halbrook arrived then, carriage wheels hissing on wet mud. A thin man, lips pale, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He stepped down with careful dignity, black coat gleaming, silver watch chain swaying, authority incarnate. Sheriff Kane, he said loud enough for all to hear, the territory entrusted you to uphold law, yet last night's events reek of negligence. A man condemned by reputation and evidence enough was spared. Now flames lick at our doorsteps. You gambled with justice, and this town pays the stake. The crowd murmured agreement, nods and grunts feeding each other like fire to dry grass. Kane's scar tightened as his jaw worked. He turned to face Halbrook. Law ain't rope nor rumor. Law is trial and proof. You want hangings without verdict. You don't want law. You want vengeance. Halbrook's gaze was cold. And what did vengeance take from you, Sheriff? A house? Perhaps more? The words stung like a whip across old scars. The judge knew too much. Kane's hand drifted near his Colt, not to draw, but to remind himself of the line between thought and deed. The outlaw Vale sat within earshot, leaning against the bars, his voice carrying like smoke through cracks. Listen to them, Sheriff. They're thirsty. You gave me water, but you gave them dust. Watch how they spit you out. His laughter threaded through the noise a vulture's call. Shut your mouth, Kane growled. But Vale only smiled wider. Mercy burns, told you. The townsfolk stirred at the words, uneasy, some stepping back, others angrier still. Inside the saloon, a meeting sparked like kindling. Kane pushed through swinging doors to find ranchers, miners, merchants, gathered in a haze of whiskey and sweat. A table slammed with fists. "We're sitting ducks," cried a farmer. "Vale's gang is out there, waitin'. He'll slip that cell, mark my words, and when he does, it'll be blood for every fence post in Cedar Falls. Sheriff won't stop it," Amos spat, slamming his mug down. "He protects killers more than us." Kane stood tall in the doorway, the lamplight catching his badge, his scar, his Colt. His voice cut through the room. "I don't protect killers. I protect law. You want rope without law, then you don't need a sheriff. You need a mob." For a moment, Silence. Then Collar's voice, smooth but sharp, broke it. Maybe a mob's what keeps us alive. Maybe mercy don't belong in Cedar Falls. All eyes swung to Kane. His deputy had spoken against him, and that was worse than any outlaw's bullet. Kane's eyes bored into him. You stand with them, deputy. You stand against your oath. Choose careful. Collar didn't flinch. He just tipped his hat, as if the choice had already been made. Outside, thunder rolled distant, promising another storm. Kane stepped into the street, and every window seemed to watch him, every shadow whispering. Children stared with wide eyes. Mothers pulled them close. Men spat or turned their backs. The town's trust, once a fragile thread, now snapped clean. He touched his badge, felt its edges cut against his calloused fingers. Law had always been a lonely road, but now it was lonelier than ever. He walked to the jailhouse, pushed open the heavy door. The place smelled of damp iron and sweat. Vale sat on his cot, chains rattling as he leaned forward. "You feel it now," Vale said softly. "The weight, not from me, from them. You spared me, Sheriff, and they'll never forgive it. A house is easy to burn, a town's faith. That's harder, but look at you, already ash." Kane stood silent, steel-gray eyes unblinking. He had faced bullets, knives, gangs in the desert. None had cut as deep as the town's doubt now did. He turned, the jail door groaning closed behind him. The gallows rope creaked above Kane's head as he stared at the burned scrap nailed to the post. His own duster, blackened, smelling of smoke and kerosene. Someone had torn it from the wreckage of his home, carried it here, and nailed it where the town could see. Not an outlaw's taunt. No, this was a neighbor's hand. Someone close enough to sift through ashes still warm. The crowd muttered behind him, words low and dangerous. "Sheriff's cursed. Brought this on us. Should have hung the bastard. A man can't even guard his own house." Kane's steel-gray eyes cut over them. He said nothing. He'd learned long ago words could turn a crowd, but silence could haunt them longer. Still, inside, his gut twisted. The fire hadn't been a random strike. It was a message, and the more he thought on it, the clearer it became. The match was lit in Cedar Falls, not outside it. He returned to the jailhouse, boots dragging mud across the threshold. The lantern inside burned low, shadows crawling across the bars. Vale was awake, leaning forward on the cot, chains loose around his wrists, as though waiting for Kane to bring news. "See how quick they turn on you?" Vale said, teeth flashing in a crooked grin. "I told you, mercy's a fire. Folks want blood, and when you won't give it, they'll take it from your hide instead." Kane ignored the words, but his eyes went to the lock. It looked untouched, yet something gnawed at him. The scrape on the keyhole, the faint smell of oil. Someone had tested it in the night. He thought of Deputy Collar's face under lamplight, pale with guilt, lips quick with excuses. Kane's fingers curled near his Colt. A good deputy didn't creep around jails after midnight. A good deputy didn't stand against his sheriff in front of half the town. Kane spoke, quiet, as if confessing to the dark itself. "If the badge on his chest ain't true, I'll strip it myself." Vale chuckled. "Maybe you already know the truth." The words lingered like smoke. By midday, Kane walked the boardwalk, silver badge dull against his chest, watching faces as men bartered at the mercantile and women hauled buckets from the pump. Everyone stared at him too long, or not at all. Guilt and suspicion rode the air heavier than dust. At the blacksmith's forge, he paused. An old iron spur lay on the anvil, 7-pointed, edges sharp. He remembered the print he'd found in the ashes of his home, 7-point rowels, pressed deep. His pulse quickened. "Who wore these?" Kane asked. The smith looked up, sweat cutting clean paths down his soot-black face. "Sold a pair last week, fine silver inlay. Fella paid in coin too clean for a drifter." "Name?" "Didn't ask, didn't care. But I recall this much. Deputy Collar was standing right there when I boxed him up. Gave the men a nod like they were kin." Kane's scar burned cold in the damp air. Betrayal. He felt it coil inside him like a snake. That evening, Judge Halbrook summoned Kane to the abandoned courthouse, the place where justice once lived before it rotted into dust and spiderwebs. The judge stood in the hollow room, moonlight through broken shutters striping his face. "You've lost the town," Halbrook said, voice calm as a hanging preacher. "They whisper your mercy is weakness. They see your home in ashes and call it a warning. Perhaps it is time you surrendered the badge before it's nailed to your coffin." Kane spun the badge in his fingers, the star flashing silver. "This badge don't belong to you, Judge, nor to the mob outside. It belongs to law." Halbrook's lips thinned. "Law without trust is nothing. Your deputy already questioned your choices before the people. Do you not see the noose tightening? Even your own men believe you've gone astray." Kane's eyes narrowed. "You sound awful sure of my deputy." The judge didn't flinch. "Collar understands what the town needs, perhaps more than you." Kane felt the words land sharp, cutting deeper than they should. He turned, the empty benches creaking under his boots. Shadows followed him out. He found Collar on the porch of the jail, lantern glow painting his face in yellow half-light. The deputy tipped his hat, casual as a card sharp. "Sheriff," he said, "heard the judge called on you. Told me much the same. Law's only worth what folks believe in it. Right now, they don't believe in you." Kane stepped closer, voice low, dangerous. "I found a spur print in my ashes. 7-point. Smith said he saw you nod at the man who bought a pair." Collar's jaw twitched. "Prints don't mean proof. You see a man nod, and you call it betrayal. Careful, Sheriff. Doubt's a poison. Drink too much, and you'll shoot your own shadow." Kane stared long, hard. His Colt weighed heavy at his hip. For a breath, he thought of drawing, ending it here, smoke and fire before the gallows. But something in Collar's eyes, too calm, too ready, held him back. Shooting now would be lawless, and lawless was the very thing they wanted from him. Instead, Kane turned, voice like a blade scraping stone. "If I find proof, deputy, I'll carve your name into the gallows beam myself." Collar didn't answer, but his smile said enough. Back inside, Kane sat at the desk, the jail quiet except for Vale's soft humming. The outlaw finally spoke, voice low and deliberate. "You're surrounded by liars, Sheriff. Men who wear stars, men who wear robes, and the people, they'll turn on you quicker than coyotes on a lamb. You spared me, but you won't spare them. Mark me, it'll be their hands that tighten the rope." Kane rubbed his scar, eyes burning into the dark. His home was ash. His deputy, a snake. His judge, a vulture. And the town itself was splitting like old timber under too much weight. The shard of blackened hinge weighed heavy in Kane's hand. It was more than iron. It was proof that someone had crawled through his ashes and plucked a piece of his ruin like a trophy. But what cut deepest wasn't that Vale now held it. It was how easily it could have been slipped to him. From outside, from inside, Kane's scar itched cold across his jaw as suspicion twisted tighter. Vale's eyes gleamed through the bars. Fire don't just take, it leaves gifts. That hinge came from your home, Sheriff. Your deputy gave it to me, said you'd know what it meant. Kane's knuckles went white around the shard. His voice dropped to a rasp. Why? Because, Vale whispered, leaning close, your badge don't shine for him anymore. He's already sold it. Kane shoved the hinge into his coat pocket, steel-gray eyes burning. He knew better than to trust Vale's words whole, but the timing was poison perfect. If Collar had carried a piece of the fire into the cell, then the rot wasn't outside Cedar Falls. It was festering inside the jailhouse walls. By morning, a storm brewed dark over the town. The streets ran with mud, but the people gathered again in the square, drawn to tension like moths to flame. Judge Halbrook stood tall on the courthouse steps, voice rolling smooth and heavy. Last night, he declared, the sheriff's mercy brought fire. Tonight, what will it bring? Another roof in ashes? More graves dug by dawn? The crowd murmured agreement. Kane stood on the jail porch, rain dripping from his hat brim, his silver badge dull but steady. Halbrook's eyes found him. Spare the outlaw again, Sheriff, and mark my words, the people will make their own law. Kane let the words settle before answering. Law written in fire and rope ain't law. It's vengeance dressed up Sunday best. His voice cut low, but carried. You want to gut justice to save your pride, Judge. You'll have to take my star with it. A hush followed, but only for a breath. Then mutters rose again, angrier. The town was a kettle, and Halbrook stirred it with every word. That afternoon, Kane returned to the ashes of his house. Smoke still clung to the ground like a ghost. The rain had washed the worst away, but black timbers jutted like broken bones. He walked slow, boots crunching charcoal. Then he saw it. In the mud where the back wall had fallen lay a silver badge. Not his own, but another, half-burned, its star warped from heat. He lifted it carefully, wiped the soot, and read the faint engraving. Marshal's office. Territory of Colorado. Kane's breath went thin. Not just bandits, not just betrayal. Someone with authority, someone meant to uphold law, had left this here, a taunt or a warning. Behind him, a branch cracked. Kane spun, Colt raised, but no outlaw stood there. Only Deputy Collar, coat collar up against the rain, face unreadable. Looking for ghosts, Sheriff? Collar asked. Kane's finger stayed on the trigger. You were here the night it burned. Collar's lip twitched. You think I lit your fire? Maybe you should ask the judge why a marshal's badge lies in your ashes. Maybe you ain't hunting me. Maybe you're hunting higher. Kane held his stare, long, scar burning. Finally, he holstered the Colt, but spoke sharp as iron. You're either playing both sides, or you're digging my grave. Either way, I'll know before sunup. Collar gave a short laugh, but his eyes were hard. Careful, Sheriff. You push too far. You'll find yourself hanging from that gallows rope you're so fond of staring at. Then he turned and vanished into the rain. That night, Kane set his trap. He left the jailhouse door unlatched, the lamp burning low, the outlaw chained but feigning sleep. He took the chair by the desk, hat low, Colt in hand. The storm howled through the eaves, covering smaller sounds. Kane's breathing slowed, every sense sharpened. Close to midnight, The latch stirred. The door creaked. Careful, slow. A figure slipped in, cloak dripping, boots whispering on the floorboards. Kane stayed still, eyes slitted, heart steady. The intruder crept toward Vale's cell, a key glinting in hand. Then the outlaw spoke, voice low and mocking. "Took you long enough." Kane moved. The Colt came up, hammer cocking with a sound like thunder. The figure froze. "Turn around," Kane said. The lantern flared, showing Collar's face pale in the glow. The key hung from his hand, caught like a guilty man in prayer. "Sheriff," Collar said, forcing calm. "I was testing the lock, same as before." Kane stood, scar white, against the shadows. "Testing locks at midnight with a key you ain't supposed to have." His voice dropped to a blade. "You gave him the hinge. You gave him the words. You trying to gut me from the inside." Collar's jaw clenched. "I ain't your enemy. I'm saving this town. That judge is right. You ain't fit to carry that star anymore. You got mercy where rope should be." Kane's Colt didn't waver. "Say one more word, deputy, and you'll be staring at justice the hard way." Collar's eyes flickered. Fear, anger, maybe regret. Then he stepped back, slow. "Careful, Sheriff. You draw on me now. You prove the judge right. You'll be the lawless one." For a long breath, only the storm spoke. Then Kane lowered the Colt a fraction, but his voice stayed hard. "You're done wearing tin in Cedar Falls. Hand it over." Collar hesitated, then unpinned the badge, let it fall to the floor with a metallic clink. "This town'll bury you, Kane, and when they do, they'll thank me for helping dig the hole." He slipped out into the storm, leaving the door yawning wide. Vale clapped slow from the shadows. "Now you're alone, Sheriff. No deputy, no town, only me." His smile gleamed. "And when your rope tightens, it won't be my neck in the noose." Kane picked up Collar's fallen badge, cold and wet in his hand. Betrayal confirmed, but worse. The judge's hand was in this too, maybe higher still, and now the outlaw watched it all unfold, waiting for his chance. The storm broke hard over Cedar Falls, hammering the roofs with rain, shaking the windows like fists. Inside the jailhouse, Kane sat at the desk, eyes locked on two badges. One silver star, scorched and bent from his ashes, marked Marshal's office, territory of Colorado. The other, Deputy Collar's, dropped in betrayal. Two tokens of law, stripped of honor, staring back at him like hollow eyes. Behind the bars, Vale sat silent now, smile thin, chains slack against the cot. His words earlier still gnawed. "Ask your deputy, ask your judge." Kane holstered his Colt, pinned his own badge firm to his chest, and rose. The judge had to answer. The courthouse loomed across the square, lanterns glowing in broken windows, gallows rope swaying like a finger of judgment. The storm wind rattled every board, but the place still held a weight, the kind of weight only power could cast. Inside, Judge Holbrook waited, coat dry, hat set perfect, as though the storm itself bent away from him. Papers lay on the long table, though Kane saw no clerk, no jury, no witness, just the judge and a half-drained glass of whiskey. "Kane," Holbrook said, voice smooth as polished wood, "I wondered when you'd come. Sit. You look like a man in need of counsel." Kane stepped forward slow, boots loud in the empty chamber. His scar burned pale in the lantern light. He didn't sit. Instead, he tossed the burned marshal's badge onto the table. It spun, wobbled, clattered to rest between them. Halbrook's eyes flicked down, then back up, calm as ever. "Found it in my ashes," Kane said. His voice was a low grind. "Marshal's badge, territory issue. You plant it there, Judge. Or was it Collar, doing your dirty work?" Halbrook sipped his whiskey before answering. "Strange, isn't it? How symbols endure even in fire. That badge, it belonged to Marshal Sutton. He was sent here to oversee you, to make sure Cedar Falls didn't sink into the same lawless mire as the border towns. But Sutton never left Cedar Falls. Do you wonder why?" Kane's eyes narrowed. His hand hovered near his Colt. "Say it." Halbrook leaned forward, voice dropping. "Sutton found you unfit. He would have stripped your star, but Outlaws took him on the trail, or so the report said. In truth, men like Vale saw their chance, and Collar helped them. I buried the matter, Sheriff, to keep this town steady. Sometimes justice requires shadows." Kane's voice cut sharp. "And burn in my house? That your kind of justice, too?" Halbrook didn't blink. "That fire wasn't mine. But I won't deny I see the lesson in it. You held mercy above the people's will, and now you reap the harvest. This town needs order. They need a lawman they can trust. Perhaps Collar, perhaps another. Not a man broken by ghosts." Kane's scar pulled taut as his teeth clenched. "You talk of order, but you feed on fear. You'd hang a man on rumor and call it law." Halbrook's voice sharpened. "Better a rope than chaos. Your mercy keeps killers breathing. What do you think Vale's gang does while you brood? They circle like coyotes, Sheriff. And when they come, blood will wash these streets. You could have ended it with one noose. Instead, you chose pity." Kane's hand touched his badge, spinning it slow, silver flashing. "Law ain't rope. Law's trial and proof. You twist it, Judge, and you're no better than the killers." For the first time, Halbrook's eyes hardened. "Careful, Kane. You stand in a courthouse. My word is law here. Cross me, and the people will see you not as sheriff, but as traitor." Thunder cracked. Lanterns shivered. Kane stepped closer, Colt resting easy at his hip. The tension was a rope pulled too tight. "Tell me plain," Kane said. "You set Collar on me, had him slip that hinge into Vale's hands?" Halbrook's lips curved thin. "Collar acts of his own ambition. I don't need to dirty my hands. Men like him gravitate to power." He drained the last of his whiskey. "But you, Kane, you've outlived your usefulness. This town sees a lawman who can't protect his own house. Tomorrow they'll demand you hang Vale. When you refuse, they'll demand your star, and I'll give it to them." The judge rose, standing tall though his frame was slight. "Think carefully, Sheriff. Side with me, and perhaps your legacy endures. Stand against me, and Cedar Falls will remember you as the man who chose mercy and brought fire." Kane's voice dropped, steel against stone. "Legacy ain't yours to give." At that moment the doors creaked. A wet boot scuffed the floor. Collar stepped inside, hat dripping, eyes flicking between them. He held no badge now, only a shotgun, double-barreled and eager. "Judge," he said, voice steady. "You were right. Town's done with Kane. Time we ended this." The judge gave the faintest nod. Kane's Colt was out before thought. The hammer clicked back, the muzzle steady between them. "You pull that trigger, deputy, and you'll be shackled in iron before the dawn." Collar smirked. "Not if the town sees a sheriff gunned down resisting justice." He stepped forward, barrel glinting. Halbrook raised a hand, calm. Alive, Collar. He must stand trial. Appearances matter. Kane's scar burned cold. Trial, under Halbrook's gavel, with the town's fury behind him, meant a rope before sundown. He was staring down a trap carefully laid. Collar's betrayal, Halbrook's authority, Vale's poison words, all threads pulled tight around his neck. The storm outside howled through broken shutters, lightning flashing white across the judge's face. In that flash, Kane saw it clear. The authority in front of him wasn't law at all. It was ambition, greed, and power, dressed in a black coat. Law ain't always justice, Kane said, voice a low growl. His colt stayed steady. But justice rides with me. The words cut the room like a gunshot, final, irreversible. Halbrook's eyes narrowed, Collar's finger tightened, and in that breathless silence, every man knew only one would walk out carrying the star. The courthouse shook as hooves thundered into Cedar Falls. Shouts cut through the storm, wild and ragged. Lanterns bobbed in the rain outside, shadows swarming like wolves around the square. Vale's gang had come, bold as fire, and the town was about to drown in blood. Inside, Sheriff Kane stood between Judge Halbrook and Deputy Collar, Colt leveled, scar white against the lightning flashes. The shotgun in Collar's hands glistened with storm water. The judge's cold eyes never left Kane's badge. Your mercy drew them here, Halbrook hissed. Do you see it now? The law bent for pity, and chaos answered. Kane's voice cut low, steady as a hammer striking an anvil. No, Judge, my mercy spared one man. Your ambition poisoned the rest. The storm cracked white light through the windows. For a moment, all three stood frozen, lawman, judge, and traitor deputy, while the gang howled outside like devils. The door exploded inward, boards splitting under a boot. Two outlaws stormed in, rifles raised, wet hats dripping, eyes wild. Collar swung his shotgun toward them. Kane's Colt barked first. The outlaw dropped, chest blooming red, rifle clattering on the stone floor. The second man wheeled, but Collar's barrels roared, cutting him down in a blast of smoke and thunder. The courthouse filled with acrid powder, ears ringing. Kane and Collar locked eyes through the smoke, enemies seconds before, bound now by survival. Halbrook's voice rose above the chaos, sharp and commanding. Hold the line. Protect the courthouse. His face gleamed with triumph, as if the gang's arrival had proved his prophecy. Kane spat into the storm. You wanted a trial, Judge. Here it is, a trial by fire. Gunfire cracked outside, windows bursting with shards as bullets tore through. Townsfolk screamed in the streets. Men who'd cursed Kane hours before now ran for cover behind wagons and walls. The gallows loomed in the lightning, ropes swinging madly like it too thirsted for a neck. Kane grabbed the judge by the coat, dragging him to the floor just as a bullet split the air where Halbrook's skull had been. Stay down, Kane growled. This ain't your court anymore. He rolled to the doorway, Colt steady, and fired into the rain. One outlaw spun and fell. Another dragged him back into the storm. Behind him, Collar reloaded fast, hands steady despite the sweat streaking his brow. They'll circle us, Sheriff. Ain't no way we hold if the town don't fight too. Kane's scar burned as he answered. Then the town'll learn justice rides on a star, not a rope. The gang poured into the square, a dozen men snarling, rifles blazing. They cut down lantern posts, set fire to hay wagons, turned Cedar Falls into a battlefield. From the jailhouse, A voice rose above the chaos. Vale, shouting through the bars, calling his men like a preacher summoning the faithful. Burn it all, tear it down. The sheriff dies tonight. The gang answered with gunfire, and firebrands hurled into porches. Flames caught fast, licking the rain-dark wood, spreading. Mercy had turned to fury, just as Vale had promised. Kane's heart twisted, his house gone, his town burning, his law unraveling. Something inside him snapped. The mercy that had stayed his hand cracked apart, and the old fury, the one born the night his wife and boy were buried, roared to life. He stepped into the doorway, rain streaking his face, Colt blazing. Each shot was final, fierce, merciless. An outlaw fell clutching his chest. Another spun into the mud. A third staggered as Kane's bullet shattered his lantern, flames spilling back across him. The square lit with fire and thunder. Kane at the center, like judgment itself. Collar fought beside him, shotgun booming, face twisted with rage and fear. For all his betrayal, for all his ambition, the deputy fought. Like a man who didn't want to die in his own town. Twice he saved Kane's back, cutting down outlaws that would have flanked him. Between volleys, Kane barked, "You still wearin' iron in your heart, deputy?" Collar spat blood, rammed fresh shells home. "I ain't dyin' a traitor." The storm whipped around them, rain turning smoke into steam. The courthouse steps ran slick with blood. Inside, Halbrook cowered behind the judge's bench, shouting orders that no one heard. He wanted control, but the storm had stripped him of power. Law didn't live in his gavel anymore. It lived in the gunfire, the courage, and the choices made in mud and fire. The gang's leader emerged then, Vale's lieutenant, a scarred brute with a torch in one hand and revolver in the other. He strode into the square, flames casting him tall against the storm. "Sheriff," he bellowed, "your mercy's dead. Come claim your grave." Kane stepped down into the square, Colt already. "You first." The world narrowed. Rain, fire, and silence. The lieutenant raised his gun. Kane's Colt flared. The outlaw dropped, torch spinning into the mud. The gang faltered, leaderless. Collar fired again, another man down. The townsfolk, seeing the tide shift, finally rose. Ranchers and farmers grabbing rifles from porches, merchants firing pistols from doorways. The mob that had cursed Kane now fought beside him, their fear turning to defiance. In the chaos, Kane stormed back to the jailhouse. He kicked the door open, rain dripping from his hat brim. Colt leveled at Vale. "You called the fire, outlaw. Now watch it die." Vale grinned through the bars, chains rattling. "Kill me, Sheriff, and you prove me right. Mercy burns, fury kills." Kane spun the key in the lock, yanked Vale to his feet, and shoved him out into the rain. The outlaw's own men froze at the sight, unsure. Kane raised his Colt high. "This man stands trial at dawn," he roared, voice cutting through gunfire. "No mob, no rope. Trial, you want justice. You'll find it in court, or you'll find it in hell." The townsfolk cheered, voices ragged but fierce. Vale's gang broke, fleeing into the storm, leaving their leader shackled in the sheriff's grip. By sunrise, Cedar Falls smoldered. Wagons burned to ash, blood soaked the square. But the town still stood. Kane dragged Vale into the courthouse, chains clanking. Collar staggered in behind him, face pale, arm bloodied. Halbrook rose from his hiding place, robes torn, eyes wide with fear. "You see?" The judge rasped. Your mercy nearly killed us all." Kane slammed the outlaw into the bench, Colt steady. "My mercy spared him for trial. My fury saved your town." His voice dropped low, deadly. "You twist the law again, Judge, and I'll make sure you swing from your own gallows." Halbrook's mouth opened, but no words came. The dawn that followed carried no triumph, only smoke, silence, and the weight of choices that could never be undone. Sheriff Kane walked among the charred beams and blood-soaked mud, knowing that Cedar Falls would never look at him the same. Some saw a savior who had held the line when law teetered on collapse. Others saw a man who had brought fire upon them by sparing an enemy. And Kane himself. He saw both truths, bound together like chains that could not be cut. The silver badge on his chest, dulled and scarred, had survived fire and fury. Yet Kane understood it was no longer just a symbol of law. It had become the mark of his own burden. Mercy had cost him his home. Fury had saved the town. Between the two, his soul walked a narrow road where justice had no map. Still, as he mounted his horse and turned into the wind, his voice whispered the creed that had carried him this far. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me.